The pantry was pitch black, save for a thin, jagged sliver of moonlight cutting across the stainless steel shelving. I shouldn't have been there. I definitely shouldn't have been eating the imperfect blackberry tart I was supposed to have thrown away 3 hours ago. But the smell of burnt sugar and rosemary was driving me insane. A siren song in a house of strict discipline. I took a bite, the crisp pastry shattering loud against my tongue, and that's when the door creaked. I froze, fork suspended. A silhouette stood in the frame, smelling of cold rain and expensive tobacco. She didn't scold me. She didn't even turn on the light. She just stepped closer, eyes glinting in the dark, and whispered, "Is it as good as it smells?" I didn't think. I just held out my fork. The Obsidian Creek Residency wasn't just a cooking school. It was a fortress, perched on a jagged cliff edge where the Pacific Ocean battered the rocks below. It was designed to isolate us. 12 of us had been selected from thousands of applicants, thrown together in a high-tech kitchen that felt more like an operating theater than a place of creation. We were here to prove we were the next generation of culinary elite, to compete for a placement that would guarantee a Michelin star within 5 years. The pressure was physical, a weight that sat on your chest from the moment you woke up until you collapsed into bed. But in that dark pantry, at 2 a.m., the pressure felt distant. It was just the smell of rain clinging to the stranger's coat and the taste of forbidden sugar. She took the bite I offered, her lips closing around the tines of my fork without hesitation. It was an intimate gesture, shocking in its casualness. She chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, analyzing the flavor with a focus that felt like a dissection. "Too much lemon zest," she said finally, her voice low and textured, like rough silk. "But the crust has anger in it." I swallowed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's not anger," I whispered, surprised by my own honesty. "It's frustration." She leaned back against the shelving, the movement causing a jar of dried chanterelles to rattle. "Frustration with the ingredients?" "With the lie," I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud. Everyone here is obsessed with foam and tweezers and making food look like architecture. They want perfection. They want control. I looked down at the half-eaten tart, the dark juice staining the white ceramic. I hate it. I don't want to paint with sauce. I want to cook until my hands burn. I want the chaos. I want the heat. It was a dangerous admission. In this place, admitting you craved chaos was like admitting you didn't belong. But there was something about her, the way she stood in the shadows, the weary tilt of her head, that made me want to spill everything. She wasn't one of the other chefs. She was too old, too poised, too comfortable in the silence. I assumed she was a donor, or perhaps a food critic staying in the guest wing, someone who understood the industry, but stood outside the fire. She stepped closer, invading my personal space with a deliberate slowness. The air between us thickened, charged with a sudden, undeniable gravity. I could see her face more clearly now, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and eyes that were dark and intelligent. She reached out, and for a second, I thought she was going to take the plate. Instead, her hand moved to my face. Her thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, a slow, firm stroke that wiped away a stray crumb of pastry. The touch was electric. It wasn't romantic exactly, it was possessive. It was the way a chef checks the ripeness of a fruit or the sear on a scallop. Her skin was cool, but it left a trail of heat that seemed to seep right into my jawbone. "Then stop cooking like a coward," she murmured. Her breath ghosted against my cheek, smelling of mint and that dark tobacco. "Chaos is only a mistake if you can't control the burn. If you want the heat, You have to be willing to stand in the fire. She held my gaze for 1 second longer, unflinching, before she pulled away. The loss of her proximity was immediate, a physical drop in temperature. She turned and walked out the door without giving me a name, without saying goodnight. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dark with the sound of the ocean roaring outside and the lingering, sultry scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a ghost. I stood there for a long time, touching the spot on my lip where her thumb had been, realizing my hands were shaking. I didn't know who she was, but I knew that for the first time since arriving, I felt awake. The morning light in the main kitchen was cruel. It flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing off the stainless steel counters until the whole room felt like the inside of a flashbulb. There were no shadows here to hide in, no corners to eat stolen tarts in. Just 12 nervous chefs standing in a rigid line, our whites pressed and pristine, waiting for the axe to fall. The silence was heavy, the kind that rings in your ears. We were waiting for the program director to initiate the first challenge, but the air felt too thin, too charged for a standard orientation. Then the double doors at the far end of the pass swung open. It wasn't a director. It was a legend. Julianne Vane walked into the room, and the atmosphere instantly depressurized. In the culinary world, that name didn't just command respect. It induced a very specific kind of terror. She was known as the Butcher of the Bay, not because she was violent, but because she dismantled careers with the same clinical precision she used to debone a quail. She was brilliant, exacting, and notoriously impossible to please. And as she stepped into the harsh fluorescent light, my stomach bottomed out. It was her. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. The coat was gone, replaced by a chef's jacket that fit her like a second skin, tailored and intimidating. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing the sharp, severe architecture of her face. But there was no mistaking the eyes. Those were the same dark, analytical eyes that had watched me in the pantry 6 hours ago. The woman who had smelled of rain and tobacco. The woman who had eaten from my fork and told me to embrace the chaos. I had confessed my deepest professional insecurity to the one person who held the power to destroy me. I felt a wave of vertigo so strong I had to lock my knees to keep from swaying. I had treated the head judge of the Obsidian Creek Residency like a confidant. I had let her touch my face. She didn't speak. She just began to walk the line. The sound of her heels on the tile was a rhythmic, terrifying metronome. Click, click, click. She stopped at Marcus, the cocky sous chef from Chicago, and stared at his station until he began to sweat visibly. She didn't say a word, just moved on, dismissing him with a slight tilt of her chin. She moved down the line like a predator inspecting a row of carcasses, looking for the weak link. And then she stopped in front of me. The air between us shifted instantly. It was that same sudden gravity from the pantry, a magnetic pull that felt dangerous in the daylight. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the stainless steel hood behind her, terrified that if I looked her in the eye, I would crumble. "Chef?" I managed, my voice tight. She stepped into my personal space. The scent hit me again. Mint, expensive tobacco, and something cooler now, like sanitizer and steel. Her gaze slid over my face, cool, detached, and utterly unrecognizable. To the rest of the room, she was inspecting a cadet. To me, she was remembering the taste of blackberries. She let the silence stretch, testing my composure, waiting to see if I would break. Then, just as she turned to leave, I saw it. A tiny, private smirk ghosted across her lips. It was gone in a microsecond, but it was there. Acknowledgement, complicity. She walked to the front of the pass, turning to face us. "Cooking is not about technique," she announced, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "Any idiot can learn to sous vide. Cooking is about memory. It is about ghosts. Your first assignment is simple. Deconstruct a childhood memory. Put your trauma on a plate. You have 3 hours." She looked directly at me then, her eyes dark and challenging. "Don't bore me." The vertigo returned. She wasn't just assigning a dish. She was daring me to bleed. The kitchen transformed into a foundry. The air grew heavy with the scent of rendering fat, scorching garlic, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. It was a chaotic ballet, 12 bodies moving in a confined space, dodging swinging pans and sharp elbows. But Julianne Vane moved through the disorder like she was walking through still water. She was brutal. She didn't yell, she didn't throw plates like the caricatures of chefs on television. She was far more terrifying than that. She would simply stand next to a station, watch a chef plate a component, and then ask a single, quiet question that dismantled their entire concept. I watched her reduce a confident Parisian saucier to tears just by asking him why he felt the need to hide the flavor of the duck behind so much orange. She was stripping us down, peeling back the layers of ego and technique until there was nothing left but the raw instinct underneath. And I was terrified she would find out I didn't have any. I was struggling with the reduction for my dish, a savory custard meant to evoke rainy Sunday afternoons. The sauce needed to be dark, bitter, and rich, a balance of burnt sugar and vinegar that was notoriously difficult to hold together. My hand was cramping around the whisk. I was terrified of burning it, terrified of ruining the base, so I kept pulling the pan off the flame, playing it safe, trying to coax the texture out with gentle heat instead of fire. It was gray. It was timid. It was exactly the kind of cooking I had told her I hated. "Stop." The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the roar of the gas burners like a knife. I froze. I didn't have to turn around to know she was there. The temperature at my back shifted, a sudden warmth radiating through the thin cotton of my chef's whites. Julianne Vane had stepped into my station. She didn't stand beside me. She stepped directly behind me, closing the gap until she was effectively trapping me against the counter. "Look at it," she said, her voice right at my ear, low and vibrating. "It's gray. It's pathetic. You're trying to negotiate with the sugar." My breath hitched. She was so close that when she inhaled, I could feel the expansion of her ribcage against my shoulder blades. The scent of her, that sharp, clean mix of mint and tobacco, overwhelmed the smell of the vinegar reducing in the pan. It was dizzying. I gripped the handle of the pan tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I don't want to burn it, chef," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and weak to my own ears. "You're lying," she whispered. Her hand came up, not to take the pan, but to cover my hand that was holding the handle. Her palm was hot, her fingers long and strong, wrapping around mine with a grip that was firm enough to bruise. It wasn't a gentle correction. It was a seizure of control. "You're not afraid of burning the sauce. You're afraid of what happens if you lose control of it." She forced my hand forward, shoving the pan back onto the center of the flame, cranking the gas dial to high with her other hand. The flame roared up, licking the sides of the copper. "Let it burn," she commanded, her lips brushing the shell of my ear. The sensation sent a shiver racing down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature of the stove. "You told me you wanted the fire. Here it is. Don't you dare pull back." She stayed there, her body pressed against mine, a solid wall of heat and authority. I was surrounded, the fire in front of me, the woman behind me. Her thumb dug into the back of my hand, forcing me to keep the pan still as the sugar darkened, bubbling aggressively, turning a dangerous, deep mahogany. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. The smell of the caramelizing sugar shifted from sweet to acrid to something complex and deep. "Wait," she murmured, her breath hot against my neck. Wait, my heart was pounding so hard, I felt like it was going to bruise my ribs. The sauce was on the edge of ruin. I wanted to pull away, to save it, to be safe. But her grip held me fast, anchoring me in the danger zone. "Now," she said. She guided my hand to kill the heat and whisk in the cold butter. The sauce emulsified instantly, turning glossy, dark, and perfect. She released me slowly, her fingers trailing off my wrist, leaving a phantom sensation of pressure that felt heavier than her actual touch. "Better," she said, stepping back into the cool air of the walkway. "Stop cooking like a coward. It doesn't suit you." She walked away without looking back, moving on to the next victim. I stood there, staring at the perfect, glossy sauce, my hand still trembling on the handle. The service ended in a blur of plating and shouting, but I couldn't focus. All I could feel was the ghost of her heat on my back. A brand that felt less like a lesson and more like a claim. I retreated to the walk-in cooler. It was the only place the noise couldn't reach me. The temperature was set to a crisp 38 degrees, a sharp, biting cold that felt like mercy against my flushed skin. I was supposedly checking inventory on the microgreens, but really, I was just trying to slow my heart rate. The adrenaline from service hummed in my blood, mixed with the lingering, confusing terror of Julianne's touch. I pressed my forehead against the metal shelving, closing my eyes, breathing in the scent of damp earth and chilling herbs. The heavy latch clicked. The seal broke with a wet suction sound, and the air pressure in the small room shifted. I didn't need to turn around. I knew that silence. It was heavier than the cold. "Hiding again?" Her voice was stripped of the kitchen's echo. In here, amongst the insulated walls, it sounded intimate, dangerously close. I turned slowly. Julianne stood blocking the exit. She had unbuttoned the top of her chef's jacket, revealing the hollow of her throat, a stark, human detail that made her seem less like a statue and more like a threat. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. That was worse. "I'm checking the inventory, chef," I lied, my breath puffing out in a white cloud between us. "You're lying," she said, stepping forward. The space was small, crowded with crates. With every step she took, the oxygen seemed to thin out. "You lie with your words, and worse, you lie with your hands. That sauce today? It was competent. It was safe. It was boring." The criticism stung more than the cold. "It was perfect," I snapped, exhaustion finally eroding my filter. "It had the right texture, the right gloss. It's what you asked for." "I asked for a memory," she countered, voice dropping an octave. "I asked for trauma. You gave me a technical exercise. You promised me honesty in the pantry, and then you walked into my kitchen and gave me a performance." She cornered me. I backed up until my hips hit the stainless steel prep table. There was nowhere to go. She stopped inches from me, close enough that I could see the fatigue lines around her eyes, the faint smudge of flour on her collar. The cold air seemed to sharpen the angles of her face, stripping away the polish she wore on the floor. "I can't be honest when you're standing over me, waiting to cut my head off," I argued, voice shaking. "You want perfection. You built this entire place to worship perfection. Don't act like I'm the one failing because I'm playing by your rules." "My rules?" She laughed, a short, humorless sound. She placed a hand on the table on either side of me, trapping me in the cage of her arms. She leaned in, face level with mine. The cold air seemed to freeze, suspending time. My rules are there to break the weak ones. I don't want your obedience. I can buy obedience. I can hire 1,000 chefs who can follow a recipe. I want your soul. Her gaze dropped to my mouth. My breath hitched, a visible cloud drifting toward her. The tension was agonizing, a pulled wire ready to snap. It wasn't professional anymore. It hadn't been professional since the pantry. "Stop trying to impress the judge," she whispered, her voice rough, scraping against my nerves. "Stop cooking for the critic. Start trying to feed the woman. Do you understand?" "I haven't met her yet," I whispered back. "Then find her." She leaned in. The movement was slow, deliberate. I thought she was going to kiss me. I wanted her to. My body betrayed me, leaning forward into the heat of her, eyes fluttering shut, waiting for the collision. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my lips, tantalizing, imminent. Then she pulled back, sharply. The cold rushed into the space between us like a physical slap. She straightened up, buttoning her jacket, the distance sliding back into place. "Inventory is fine," she said, voice cool again. "Get some sleep. You look like a mess." She turned to the heavy door, hand hovering over the latch for a fraction of a second, a hesitation that looked almost like regret, before she pushed it open. The seal broke with a hiss, and she was gone. I was left shivering in the sudden silence, my heart hammering a frantic, broken rhythm against my ribs, alone in the cold. The note had been slid under my door sometime during the dinner break. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that cost more than my first set of knives. There was no header, no signature, just a time and a location written in sharp, angular fountain pen strokes. 11 p.m., the Crow's Nest. Bring the dish. The Crow's Nest was Julianne's private office, a glass-walled observatory at the very pinnacle of the residency, overlooking the churning black water of the Pacific. Walking up the spiral staircase felt less like a professional summons and more like walking to the gallows. I was carrying a covered tray, balancing it with hands that felt clammy. The dish underneath the silver dome wasn't the technical marvel I had prepped for the morning challenge. It wasn't the safe gray custard she had despised. It was an apology, and it was a weapon. I knocked on the heavy oak door. Enter. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a low fire in the hearth and the moonlight reflecting off the ocean outside. It didn't smell like a workspace. It smelled of cedar, old books, and that rich, ruinous tobacco. Julianne was standing by a side table, decanting a bottle of dark red wine. She had shed the chef's whites. In their place, she wore a charcoal silk blouse that draped loosely over her frame, softening the severe lines of her shoulders. She looked younger in the half-light, but no less dangerous. She didn't look up as I entered. "Close the door." I let the latch click shut, sealing us in. The sound of the wind outside was muffled here, reduced to a low, rhythmic thrumming against the glass. I walked to the large mahogany desk and set the tray down. "You asked to see the memory," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. Julianne turned, holding a glass of wine by the stem. The liquid was almost black in the dim light. She walked over to the desk, her movements fluid and predatory, and set the glass down. Then, she reached out and lifted the silver dome. Steam curled up, carrying the heavy, primal scent of roasted meat and earth. It was roasted bone marrow, served in the bone, topped with a salad of bitter parsley, capers, and shallots, with a slice of grilled sourdough on the side. It was ugly food. It was messy, fatty, and visceral. It was the kind of thing you ate with your hands when you were starving, not the kind of thing you served on fine china. She stared at it for a long moment. "Bone marrow," she said flatly. "It's heavy. It's unrefined." "It's what we ate when we couldn't afford steak," I replied, standing my ground. "It's the flavor of scraping the bottom of the barrel and finding out the best part was hiding there all along." She looked up at me then, her eyes unreadable. She picked up a small spoon. She didn't ask me to explain the technique. She didn't ask about the sourcing. She just leaned over the desk and dug the spoon into the soft, yielding center of the bone. I watched her eat. It felt voyeuristic. She brought the spoon to her lips, closing her eyes as the rich, fatty marrow hit her tongue. She chewed slowly, deliberately. I watched the muscles in her throat work as she swallowed. I watched the way her tongue darted out to catch a drop of oil on her lip. The silence in the room stretched so tight I thought it might snap. She took a piece of the bitter greens, chasing the fat with the acid, balancing the chaos on her palate. She took another bite, then another. She wasn't tasting it like a judge anymore. She was eating it like a person who was hungry. Finally, she set the spoon down. The clatter against the china was startling. She picked up her wine, took a long sip, and then looked at me. The barrier between us had fractured just a fraction. Her eyes were dark, dilated, reflecting the firelight. "It's arrogant," she said softly. My stomach dropped. "Chef, It's arrogant," she repeated, cutting me off. "Because you assumed I would understand it. You assumed I would be willing to get my hands dirty." She paused, swirling the wine in her glass. "And you were right. It's delicious." The air left my lungs in a rush. "It's honest," she continued, her voice dropping to that low, texture-heavy register that made my skin prickle. "It tastes like hunger." She set the glass down and began to walk around the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs. She didn't stop at a professional distance. She kept coming until she was standing right in front of me, invading my space just like she had in the pantry, just like she had at the stove. But this time, there was no fire to blame the heat on. "You stopped cooking for the critic," she murmured, reaching out. Her hands settled on my hips, her thumbs pressing into the fabric of my apron. The touch was grounding, heavy. "You cooked for me." "I wanted you to taste it," I whispered. "I did." She leaned in. The first brush of her lips was tentative, a question. She was giving me a chance to back away, to run, to remember that she was the head judge and I was a nobody. I didn't run. I stepped closer, my hands finding the silk of her blouse, feeling the warmth of her skin underneath. The second kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. She kissed me with the same intensity she brought to the kitchen, exacting, demanding, and overwhelming. Her mouth was hot, tasting of tannins and the lingering richness of the marrow. She kissed me like she was analyzing the flavor of my breath, taking me apart, component by component. It was a devouring. I made a low sound in my throat, and she responded by pulling me flush against her, her body solid and real against mine. The professional barrier didn't just dissolve, it incinerated. There was no judge, no student, just the heat, the taste of wine, and the dangerous, terrifying realization that I had just crossed a line from which there was absolutely no return. The sun rose over the Pacific like a bruise, purple and swollen. I walked into the kitchen with the taste of her still on my tongue, a phantom flavor of Merlot and desire that toothpaste couldn't scrub away. I was naive. I expected a look, a lingering glance across the pass, a softening of the eyes that said, "I know, I remember." Instead, I walked into a slaughterhouse. Julianne was already there, standing at the head of the prep table. As I entered, she turned her back to me, engaging Marcus in a conversation about knife sharpening that felt pointedly exclusive. She didn't acknowledge my existence until I was at my station, knife in hand, breaking down a side of halibut. "Stop." The word cracked through the air like a whip. The kitchen went silent. 11 other knives stopped moving. Julianne walked over to my station, her heels clicking a rhythm that was painfully familiar, yet terrifyingly different from the night before. She looked down at my cutting board. "Look at the fillet," she said, her voice devoid of the texture it had held in the office. It was flat, sterile. "The edges are ragged. You're sawing at the protein. You're treating a $60 a pound fish like it's cardboard." "Chef, I used one stroke." "Don't argue," she snapped. She picked up the fillet, my work, and dropped it into the waste bin. The thud echoed in the silence. "It's sloppy. It lacks discipline. Start over. And if you ruin another one, you're out of the kitchen for the day." She turned on her heel and walked away. No secret smirk, no hidden warmth, just ice. The whiplash was so violent I almost dropped my knife. The woman who had pressed me against her desk and unraveled me with her mouth was gone. In her place was the butcher of the bay, and she was sharpening her blade on my spine. The rest of the morning was a blur of criticism. My brunoise was uneven, my station was messy, my timing was off. She was relentless. It felt personal, but in the wrong way. She wasn't pushing me to be better, she was pushing me away. She was building a wall of criticism so high that neither of us could climb over it. "She's riding you hard," Marcus muttered, leaning over from his station as he whisked a vinaigrette. "Or she likes you. With Vane, it's hard to tell the difference." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Focus on your sauce, Marcus." "I'm just saying," he smirked, his eyes darting toward where Julianne was berating a pastry chef. "She doesn't waste that much energy on people she doesn't care about. She's either trying to break you, or she's trying to hide something." His words planted a seed of paranoia that rooted deep in my stomach. Did they know? Could they see it? Every time she looked at me, I felt exposed. Every critique felt like a cover-up, a loud, public declaration that nothing happened here. The kitchen, usually a place of focus, became a minefield of subtext. I felt watched. I felt edible. I tried to corner her during the afternoon break. I saw her slipping into the dry storage corridor, a narrow hallway lined with spices and grains. I followed, my pulse racing. "Chef," I called out softly. She stopped, her back to me. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her face was a mask of exhaustion and iron. "We need to talk," I said, stepping closer. "About last night." "There is nothing to talk about," she cut in, her voice freezing the air between us. "Last night was a lapse in judgment. It was a mistake." It didn't feel like a mistake. "This is a residency," she hissed, stepping into my space. But this time the proximity felt cold, threatening. "Not a romance. I am the head judge. You are a candidate. If you think that what happened in my office gives you an advantage, or if you think it changes the standard I expect from you, you are delusional." "I don't want an advantage," I shot back, the hurt flaring into anger. "I want to know if the person who told me to cook with my soul was lying." Her eyes flickered. For a second, the mask slipped, revealing a flash of panic, or maybe regret. Then it slammed back into place. "Get back to your station," she said, turning away. "And don't waste my time with mediocrity again." She left me standing in the hallway, smelling of saffron and rejection. The sting was physical, but beneath the hurt, something else ignited. Anger. Pure, distilled anger. She wanted fire? She wanted me to stop being a coward? Fine. I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my knife, and attacked the prep work with a ferocity that scared even me. I wasn't cooking for her approval anymore. I was cooking to survive her. And then the announcement came. The program director gathered us at the pass. "Tomorrow is the gala," he announced. "One service, one menu. The winner gets the placement." Julianne stood beside him, staring straight ahead. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The war was on. The sabotage wasn't subtle. It was a blunt force trauma to my station. I returned from the dry storage with a canister of liquid nitrogen, my mind racing through the final assembly steps for my dessert. A delicate, transparent sphere of spun sugar meant to house a suspension of elderflower mousse. It was technical, impressive, and entirely soulless. It was exactly the kind of dish that won competitions because it looked like it had been made by a human, not a human. But when I reached my bench, the spheres were gone. In their place was a pile of glittering, sticky shards. Someone had accidentally dropped a heavy cast iron skillet directly onto the tray. The sugar glass was shattered, the delicate architecture reduced to expensive dust. I stood frozen, the nitrogen canister heavy and cold in my hand. Across the kitchen, Marcus was wiping down his station, whistling a low, tuneless melody. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I had 45 minutes until service. There was no time to spin new sugar. The humidity in the kitchen was already too high. The sugar wouldn't set. My entire concept, the culmination of 6 weeks of hell, was destroyed. Problem? The voice came from behind me, cool and unbothered. I turned to find Julianne standing there. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the wreckage on my cutting board. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. She looked like a scientist observing a failed experiment. My prep is ruined, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. Someone smashed the spheres. It looks like it, she agreed, reaching out to touch a shard of broken sugar. It crunched under her fingertip. Careless. It wasn't careless, I hissed, glancing at Marcus. It was deliberate. You have to give me more time. You have to. I have to do nothing, she cut me off, her eyes snapping to mine. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. This is a kitchen, not a courtroom. I don't care about fairness. I care about the plate. I can't plate a disaster. Then don't, she said simply. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. If you can't survive a little poison, you can't run my kitchen. You think the world stops because something broke? You think the critics care if your sous chef hates you? They only care about what they taste. She leaned in, the rough silk of her voice scraping against my composure. You tried to present me with a glass cage, she whispered, her lips brushing the shell of my ear. Maybe it deserved to be broken. Stop trying to be impressive. Be real. You have 40 minutes. Fix it or pack your knives. She walked away. She didn't fire Marcus. She didn't offer me a lifeline. She left me standing in the ruins of my perfection with nothing but the ticking clock and the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. I watched her go, and for a moment, I hated her. I hated her coldness. I hated her refusal to save me. And then I understood. She wasn't protecting me because she didn't want a protege who needed protection. She was testing to see if I was strong enough to stand beside her. She didn't want the sugar sphere. She had never wanted the sphere. She wanted the fire. I looked down at the shattered sugar and swept it all into the trash. The crash of the bin lid was the sound of a decision being made. I turned to the pantry. I didn't grab the hydrocolloids or the stabilizers. I grabbed a bag of rye flour. I grabbed a basket of wild blackberries, dark and staining. I grabbed fresh rosemary and a block of cold, salted butter. I was going to make the tart, not the fancy, deconstructed version, the real one. The one I had been eating in the dark when we first met. The secret. It was professional suicide. You don't serve a rustic, hand-formed galette to Michelin critics. It's too simple. It's peasant food. But as I worked, smashing the butter into the flour with my bare hands, feeling the cold fat yield to the heat of my skin, the panic evaporated. I wasn't thinking about the judges. I wasn't thinking about the placement. I was thinking about her mouth. I was thinking about the way she had looked at me in the office, the way she had tasted the marrow. "It's arrogant," she had said, "and it's delicious." I rolled the dough out rough and thin. I crushed the berries until my fingers were stained purple, like I'd been fighting. I didn't measure the sugar. I tasted it. I threw in a handful of smoked salt to cut the sweetness. The oven blasted heat into my face as I slid the trays in. I was covered in flour. My hair was coming loose from its pin. I looked like a wreck. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't shaking. "Service in 5, the expediter shouted. I pulled the tarts out. The pastry was golden, dark at the edges, bubbling with violet juice that smelled of summer storms and burnt rosemary. It wasn't perfect. It was messy. It was alive. I plated it on stark white ceramic. No garnish, no foam. Just the tart, bleeding its truth onto the porcelain. I wiped the rim of the plate, took a deep breath, and walked toward the dining room doors. I wasn't carrying a dessert. I was carrying a confession. The double doors to the dining room swung open, and the chaotic, mechanical roar of the kitchen died instantly, severed by the heavy oak threshold. I stepped into the lion's den. The air here was different, cool, still, and scented with beeswax candles and old money. The critics sat at a long, imposing table that looked more like a tribunal than a dinner party, their faces illuminated by low amber light that cast long shadows across the white tablecloths. I walked toward the head of the table. My boots felt heavy on the plush carpet, a stark contrast to the slick, hard tiles I was used to. I carried the plate with both hands, like an offering to a temperamental god. I set it down in front of Julianne. The silence that followed was absolute. To her left, Marcus's dish sat on the table, a pristine, nitrogen-frozen sphere of mousse that looked like a piece of modern art. It was technically flawless. It was cold. It was safe. Next to it, my tart looked violent. The crust was dark, almost charred at the edges, rough and hand-formed. The juice from the blackberries had bled onto the stark white ceramic, a deep, bruised purple that looked like a wound. It wasn't polite food. It was a riot on a plate. It smelled of summer storms and wood smoke, a scent that disrupted the sterile elegance of the room. A critic with thin, wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward, adjusting his napkin with a disdainful flick of his wrist. "A rustic tart?" he murmured, his voice dripping with skepticism. "For the final placement, it seems unfinished." I didn't look at him. I didn't defend the dish. I just looked at her. Julianne stared at the plate. Her face was unreadable, the professional mask firmly in place. She picked up her fork. The metal clicked against the ceramic, a sharp sound in the hushed room. She didn't cut a polite, triangular piece. She pressed the side of the fork into the crust, shattering the edge just like I had in the pantry all those nights ago. The sound was a brittle crack that echoed. She lifted the bite to her lips, the rough pastry, the dark fruit, the stain of the rosemary juice. She closed her eyes. Time seemed to warp. I could feel the sweat cooling on the back of my neck, the ache in my hands from the heat of the oven. I held my breath, waiting for the axe to fall. I waited for her to tell me it was sloppy, that I had failed the test of refinement, that I had mistaken passion for skill. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. For the first time in public, the distance evaporated. There was no butcher of the bay in that gaze. There was just the woman who had wiped the crumb from my lip in the dark. Her eyes were dark, dilated, and shining with something that looked terrifyingly like pride. She didn't look at the critic who had scoffed. She didn't look at the other judges. She looked at me, and the corner of her mouth lifted in that tiny, private smirk I had seen only once before. "Honest," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. Finally. She took another bite, savoring it, letting the silence stretch until it became a power move. This, she addressed the table without looking away from me, is what memory tastes like. It isn't pretty, it's messy, it stains. She swallowed, her gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second, heavy with subtext. And it is perfect. The room exhaled. The other judges began to eat, nodding, murmuring in agreement as the flavor hit them. But I didn't hear them. I only heard the blood rushing in my ears. I hadn't just won a placement. I had won her. I had forced her to see me, not as a student to be broken, but as an equal who was willing to burn. The kitchen was quiet now. The gas burners cold, the staff long gone. I was leaning against the stainless steel pass, wiping flour from my hands, when she appeared. Julianne stood in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of cheap kitchen wine. Her hair was down, softening the sharp lines of her face. She looked tired, human, and devastating. "So," she asked, sliding a glass toward me, her voice low and stripped of command, "what's for breakfast?" I took the glass, stepping into her space until the heat of her radiated against my chest. I smiled. "Anything you want." If you've ever found love in the heat of the moment, subscribe for the next course.